Leviathan Dreadnoughts. And now for a very brief word from the sponsor of this video. Real swift, let's get into it. The Internet. What a wonderful place. You gain knowledge, wisdom, details, and entertainment of every possible form. Yet, it is not without its dangers. For every time you surf the high seas, you are often being watched, stalked by a robber who is waiting for your slightest mistake. Hackers. But you can make it difficult for them, can thwart them at every turn with one simple action. Download Surfshark today. It not only protects you from the gaze of Sauron, but can also open up your world of entertainment. With this virtual personal network, or VPN, you are untraceable and protected. But you can also change your settings so you can view entertainment from across the globe. Unscrupulous companies prevent you from seeing what is readily available elsewhere, but not with Surfshark. Get Surfshark VPN using promo code Baldermort for 83% off and 3 extra months for free. Protect yourself and your loved ones from all forms of cybernetic horror. So hit the links in the description and put up your Surfshark shields right now. Welcome, gentle listener, I am Baldermort, your faithful servant, and I wish to introduce you to the forces, factions, and war gear of the 30K universe and the Horus Heresy, where the age of knowledge and enlightenment has ended, and the age of darkness has begun. And today, we are to discuss one of the most devastating pieces of war gear of the Legiones Astartes, the Space Marines, to ever grace the field of combat. For today, in celebration of the monumental declaration from Games Workshop that we are to have these figures in plastic, let us discuss the legendary Leviathan Siege Dreadnought. Of all of its kind, the terrifying weapons of war known as Dreadnoughts, it must surely be their king. And it is not as simple as one might think, for one could look at a Leviathan Dreadnought and think, a bigger Dreadnought. Okay, where's the story here? Well, gentle listener, let me try to explain. For the Leviathan is not merely a larger Dreadnought, it is a symbol, a sign, a promise of conflict to come. A conflict that nobody expected or predicted, but one that was nonetheless potentially planned, or at the very least, factored for, because of one simple statement, a tiny detail, an almost impossibly small fact. For the Leviathans were not made on Mars or any other forge world. They were not created, maintained, or developed by the Adeptus Mechanicum. And that is the crux of the matter for me. Standing at approximately 20 feet tall, the Leviathan was a towering colossus of war. It had an advanced atomantic reactor that was far larger than any of its peers. Hence, it had a power supply factors more than any other dreadnought, and this made advanced weaponry possible. For many weapons that were placed on this beast were actually developed for it specifically, as it had this abundance of energy. And the atomantic shielding it supported was multi-layered and nigh on impenetrable. Think multiple shields a la any sci-fi out there. But like some titans, they could cycle their shields. So if one dropped, another was already in place. Then, if that one was battered and about to drop, the first would usually be snapping back in place. Nasty. Its ceramite plate armor was reinforced to such a degree that even specific anti-tank or armor weapons would barely dent it. It could diffuse energy, heat, and impact across its entire frame to practically ignore all but dedicated heavy artillery. They were designed for the heaviest fighting possible, the direst of situations, siege warfare. And that, as I have identified before in my collaboration with that rascal Major Kill, is one of the most horrific battlefield environments. Their weaponry is mostly bespoken, as stated, and was truly devastating. The most prevalent version of the Leviathan was the close quarters battering ram loadout. It would have 2 siege claws with built-in melter weapons, melty, and when it was resisting a counter sally, or when it had broken through the lines of defences, it had torso flamers to douse anyone near it with promethium death. The siege claws could be replaced with siege drills, the difference being that the claws could dig through walls and men and armour. The drills were better at grinding down heavier fortified curtain walls, and, of course, taking to pieces the largest armour, and even knights, or their equivalent. Its sheer physical strength, matched to these weapons, meant that no defences could be held, few weapons would stop them, and they were near indestructible when they breached and went on rampages inside the walls of the enemy. Very nasty indeed. Though this was undeniably their main role, the extra energy and their atomantic power cores meant that short-range fire platforms were also created out of them. The weaponry is, as one might expect, just as lethal as its close-quarters version. Cyclonic melter lances, which were basically melter weapons set out in a Gatling gun-style rotating cannon, meaning that their rate of fire of the deadly melty was eye-watering. The Grav Flux Bombard, a huge gun that fired spiring vortices of gravitation-torsion force. Gravity beams, basically, that crushed or smashed armour, annihilating the skeleton and internal organs of even the heaviest armoured warriors. The Leviathan Storm Cannon Array, which was 4 autocannon configuration weapons in the one, ideal for scything down swathes of men, and lighter vehicles in their droves. The Phosphex Bomb Discharger, firing corrosive and flammable rounds that are even more dangerous than promethium. And of course, a pair of Volkite calivers could be placed on it, which I have described only recently. In essence, horrific heat rays that combust everything they strike. These heavy versions could smash armour, annihilate even ultra-heavy foot like Terminators. They sound like the kind of thing the Imperium of the Great Crusade would generate in abundance, eh? Well, there were some drawbacks. The first was that the technology was very high indeed, even for those days, and the constituent parts and skill required to create them was such that it was estimated that they may have been as resource-heavy to construct as a small knight. Yes. They also had such powerful feedback to them, the energy so huge, that the pressure placed on the operator, the Space Marine, was almost unbearable. Even the gene-enhanced and psycho-indoctrinated heroes of the Great Crusade would eventually bend and then bow under the struggle. There were also statements that suggested that the tech used was not entirely pure or safe. Somehow they must have misunderstood it, or never fully compromised its heritage, as operators of these vehicles were said to be in danger of losing their minds. This was due to some saying that previous operators, visions of the Dark Age, and even subsequent Old Knight were ghosts in the machine. So in a very real way, the operators were tasked with a situation akin to one that is faced by a Titan or Knight pilot, to do battle with the machine spirit and the remnants of those who had been in the Dreadnought before. They were more advanced and more complicated than the age could truly allow, safely at any rate. They were never deployed in great numbers due to these constraints. They simply took too long to make. Like the Custodes, they were ideal for the heaviest battle detail specialists, but not for standard line deployment. And as the horror of the Horus Heresy unfolded, the Loyalists could still gain what little few were created, but not the traitors, who were forced to protect them, making them useless, or to scavenge the battlefields, attempting to gain enough parts to create their own out of cannibalized wrecks. Hardly dependable. Lauded to the high heavens for their use in siege warfare, they were put to good use by both sides in the heresy. Thus it is that they are intensely rare, even by the time of the Scouring, let alone 10 or more millennia later, in the grim darkness of the far future, in the age of Indomiters. But now we shall discuss what they represent, what they meant, as I mentioned at the start of this discourse. For it is noted in the newest Horus Heresy manuals that they made the mechanicum very nervous indeed, and this would have been for a slew of reasons. They were not a known STC, or standard template construct design. Like the contempted Dreadnought, they hailed from Terra, not Mars. In the cataclysmic wars of unification, when the Emperor rose to lead his people, humanity, and had to dominate all of what we call Earth, they called Terra. There were many forms of proto-dreadnought, operated by mere mortals, and they were deployed in entire legions in number. So, to a certain extent, they were merely the product of their time, like all dreadnoughts of the Legiones Astartes. But they represented a threat to Mars and every forge world in the galaxy. For they were not STC created. They were hybrid tech from the Dark Age and Old Night. Some said that the Emperor designed them himself, yet new law diminishes his grandeur and certainly his achievements, so this is now unlikely. But it was his men and women, his own technological savants, who made it possible. And any rival in knowledge, especially technology, would be a worry for the mechanicum. For their entire religion was at threat by those who could perform mechanical wonders if it was not from them. Now they had the recourse in their minds that this was not anathema, as the Emperor was believed by many to be the Omnissiah, so he alone was able to innovate and alter, for he was indeed their God, their chosen one. But not all of the mechanicum believed this, and even those who believed were not as illogical as many in the human race. They could witness the power of the Leviathan Dreadnought, and a shudder would go down their neural links. For here was proof that they were not indispensable. Oh, they were essential now, during the Crusade, then during the Heresy, but in the future? The merest fact that others could create technological marvels was like a death knell for their dominance. Nor had they been allied with the Imperium for that long, not when one considers the duration that they had existed and simply ignored Terra and the vast majority of that time. It was also in their lethality. What if the Emperor had won the Crusade, his legions mostly intact, his Primarchs prepared and, if we can be honest, cooling their heels after loving warfare for centuries? Who would he direct them at? Because they would need to continue fighting. Most of them, at the very least. It was what they were made to do. The Leviathan Dreadnought was a secret project originally, like the Ordo Sinister. And they would be the perfect counter to the Legio Cybernetica of the Mechanicum. Oh, they were expensive and hard to create, but only while the Imperium was in a never-ending, full-scale war economic model. What if the Crusade had won out? Then they would have all the resources and time they would need. And the Mechanicum could look at these Leviathans and the other dreadnoughts of Astartes, and the legions themselves, and know that the Emperor could, if he so wished, crush them. Few in the Mechanicus of today would even give the slightest credence to this hypothesis, but the potential was there. And we all know that the Emperor would not be gainsaid, would not be resisted, and he would not permit anyone to breach his imperial truth with the Mechanicum. His imperial truth, the firm-held belief that there were no gods, no mysticism, no magic. It would only have taken one further diktat from him, the rebuttal of the title and ideology of an Omnissiah at all, the refutation of the mystic silliness of the tech priests, and he could then mobilize everything he had to crush the Forge Worlds, sweep away their superstition, and then return humanity to logic and progress. And, in reality, when one reads even a smattering of the Horus Heresy, can anyone say that this would not be perfectly typical of the Emperor's modus operandi? To use a group or person until they have fulfilled his need, outlived their usefulness. Can anyone believe that he would have said, "Okay, we have eliminated all faith, superstition and backwardness from the entire galaxy, but let's leave the funny guys in red, because they make me laugh"? Perhaps not. A lot has been made of the self-professed lies of Malcador to his friend as she expired. The lies that state the Emperor was always going to force the Horus Heresy and allow the Astartes to wipe each other out. Yet I cannot agree with this, for in my reading of the old lore, he was not an idiot, and the nature of humanity is not that of the Eldar. For the Eldar merely controlled the galaxy. They did so for millions upon millions of years. They were so powerful that the Necrons went into slumber, fled through time to avoid them. They culled the Krork so badly that they devolved into the Orcs, and then were just forced to the edges of the galaxy. Yet in all of this time, in all of this power, they never once ventured out. They stopped at the owning of the galaxy and let it be. Then, eventually, they disappeared up their own libidos until they degenerated into hedonism and birthed a dark god that consumed them. Yet humanity is not the same, and the Emperor was not wasteful. Not really. One can point to the Thunder Warriors and say, "There, he wasted them. They could have been used in the Great Crusade." But people forget, or don't know, that the conquest of Terra was merely the first step. Upon the massacre of the Thunder Warriors on Mount Ararat, he did not just skim over to a spaceport and simply begin the crusade. There were decades of preparation before he left and took to the stars on his rampage. The Thunder Warriors would not have lasted that long, nor would they have been able to be retired or muzzled. Like rabid dogs, they had to be put down. So that is why they were slain and not used. He could not get into the stars fast enough, and would not be able to trust them to simply cool their heels on massive, close-confined ships while in transit. They would have gone mental and butchered all aboard, simply out of inactivity, or have been factored into assaults, only to find that they had either killed each other or had simply imploded under their own genetic anomalies. So no, the Emperor did not waste the Thunder Warriors. He annihilated them for good reason. Well, as good a reason as he ever had. But that is a thing unto itself, for he was callous and detached, but he was trying to save an entire race. Hence, the few would always be judged against the goal, the needs of the many, and in this, the Thunder Warriors were simply not worth the resources to retool or reuse. So in my mind, the Emperor was always aware that he would have to deal with the anachronistic, anti-intellectual, mystic and superstitious mechanicum, and that would take some doing. His legions, with his Primarchs, with tools and weapons such as the Leviathan, would be able to do it, but do it safely, so that there would be enough Marines left to protect the new Imperium from external sources, external threats. And this also brings me to that other point. Humans are not the same as Eldar. We are not weaker copies of their grandeur. I believe that the Emperor would not rest. He would look at his galaxy and say, "Okay, this is safe, but this is not the universe." The one decision or idea that never once crossed the Eldar minds to consider. Who or what else is out there? We know that we are inquisitive, we humans. I do not think he would have rested, or more to put it, he would not have allowed his people to stagnate. But this leads me to my last point, which I will go into in more detail in the future, I'm still tinkering with much of it. Because I honestly believe the Emperor would have returned to form. He would have then slunk back into the background, as he has done so many times before. This isn't the first time he's done this. He has arisen, attempted to guide humanity, then retreated again. He has been so many of our most influential minds and voices, all throughout history, if one adheres to the oldest lore. And I think the Primarchs, and one in particular, would have permitted him to do so. To say, humanity is safe, and then to hide again, until needed. But that is a long, long conversation for another day, another entry in the Bald Library. Hence, for today, we sum up. The Leviathan Siege Dreadnought is one of the most lethal wargear of the Legiones Astartes, a magnificent model, and finally, coming out in plastic. I want a few more of these things in my collection, because, all lore and statistics aside, they just look so damn horrible. As a standard Dreadnought is to the 40k setting, for me, the Leviathan is it for the Horus Heresy, the iconic model that shows the very flavour of the period. A time of unfettered war. I have been Baldermort, your faithful servant. I hope you have enjoyed this brief introduction to the Leviathan Dreadnought of the Age of Darkness. If so, then please do consider liking and subscribing, and potentially joining our Patreon, so that you can support further video generation. And if you do go out and buy some of these wonderful beasts, do have a look at the links in the description, as they can garner you a healthy discount. And thank you for your precious time. Now, no matter what you do today, do try to make some time for fun. Toodaloo.